Hello everyone, this is the video 45 of my database management systems question video series. In the previous video, we started a special series about DDL queries, which is data definition language, and we create queries using that language, and we directly command the MySQL server to create databases without using any tool. So let's see what we have to do in this video. Without further ado, let's jump into our question set. Here is the question set 45. This is the same context we read earlier. I'm not going to read that question set, that context again. Let's directly start answering the questions. But before that, let me show you the database we create. Here we are in MySQL command line client, and we are accessing the MySQL server directly using this terminal. Okay, here you can see this is the keyword, the command line I use to show all the details, all the databases in our MySQL server right now. Here, this is the table. This is the database. Runabima SCHDB is the database we create in the previous video, and in that database, sorry, I'm going to use this database. Okay, I command the database to I command the MySQL server to use this specific database Runabima SCHDB. Now we can see that uh, tables we create in this database. So sorry. Okay, here are the tables we created in the Runabima SCHDB student, subject, and teacher. Okay, now we are going to answer to the question set 45. This is the first part of this question. All the teachers in the school teach one subject or several subjects. Create a table called teacher has subject to store information on all the subjects that teachers teach. In the initial stage of this software, the principal decides to store the details of the teachers who teach only the main subjects of grade 9. Follow the instructions below to create this table. Use DDL Query to create the table. Okay. Here, now we have to create a new table, but the difference is this table is the table we use to define which subjects, sorry, which teacher teaches which subject in grade 9 class. So this very table has connection with the subject table and also the teacher table. Subject table stores only the subject details like subject name and subject ID, and teacher table stores only the details of the teachers. And only the subject ID and the teacher ID is stored in this teacher has subject table, and we can define uh, which teacher teach which subject. So let's see uh, how to create this table. Create table if not exists in Ranabima SCHDB, and this is the table name teacher has subject. And now we have to mention what are the attributes we are going to create in this table. So this is the first attribute, subject name, and it's in integer format. Especially the length is 45, and additional options are the values in this attribute is not null, so null value cannot be stored in this attribute. And also we have to mention this attribute is a foreign key, but usually in DDL queries we mention the foreign keys at the end of the query. So before that we have to create the teacher ID attribute too. So the next attribute is teacher ID, and also it's in integer format with up to 45 characters, and especially it's not null. Actually not especially, by default it's not null, and it's a foreign key. So now we can mention the foreign keys. Foreign key, this is the first foreign key. uh, Subject, and the references are in the subject table. Sorry, not this one. In subject table, the subject ID should fall into this teacher has subject table. So let's mention subject ID, and here's the next foreign key. In subject table, subject ID is the reference table, and again here's the next foreign key. It's the teacher ID, and here's the references. Here are the references. The teacher table. In the teacher table, teacher ID is the reference table to this foreign key, and here's the complete query. Now we can execute this one. Sorry, there's an error. The column name is wrong. uh, there's a spelling mistake. We can correct this. Okay, here's the error. Subject. Now we can execute our query. Okay, this one should, the foreign key is not subject, not only the subject ID, and teacher ID. Okay, that here's the query, and okay, query okay, and 0 rows affected. That means our query executed without any errors, and let's see whether our table created or not. Here show. Okay, here are the new set of tables created in our Ranabima SCHTB student, subject, teacher, and here's the new table. Teacher has subject, and also we can command the MySQL server to describe the attributes in our teacher has subject table. So in Runaby MyCHTB, the teacher has subject table. Here these are the two attributes we created: subject ID and teacher ID. The data types are integers, and uh, especially by default, uh, the data in these tables are not null, and the key is mul. Mul means there are multiple connections between these two attributes with another two tables, which uh, are subject table and teacher table. Okay, and we complete the first part of our question, and here's the next one. It is necessary to add a column name ID to the table named teacher has subject, which is created to store all the subjects stored by teachers. The column you add is with the primary key, and your team leader has said that auto increment is mandatory. Name the DDL query required for that. Use the query to add that column to the teacher has subject table. Okay. Uh, in teacher has subject table, there are only two attributes. We have to add another new attribute called ID, and that ID is the primary key. To do that, there's a DDL query uh, called, actually there's a keyword called alter table. Now we have to mention the database and the table name in Ranabima SCHDB. The table name is teacher as subject, and we are going to add a new attribute. So add, and we have to mention what is the name of this attribute, which is the name ID, and it's in integer format, and also it's the primary key and auto incremented, so not null, auto increment, and it's the primary key. Okay, query okay, that means that's our query executed without any errors, and we can see what's inside our table. Teacher has subject described in Ranabima SCHDB. Teacher has subject, and here are the uh, updated version of our teacher has subject table. The attributes are subject ID, teacher ID, and this is the new attribute ID, and it's the primary key. You can see PRI means the primary key, and also it's auto incremented. And uh, I think we complete the second part of our question. Now we can move on to the third one. It is compulsory for all students in grade 9 of uh, school to learn all the major subjects. Create a table named student has subject to store that information. To do so, follow the instructions below. Use the DDL code to create this table. Okay. In the previous two questions, we create a table to uh, store the details which teacher teaches which subject, and these details are these subjects are in grade 9. These subjects are related to grade 9, and now again we have to store details of the students, which students uh, learn which subject. So we have to create another table, teacher has subject, this time students has subject, and the attributes are subject id and student id. So let's create these tables. This table, create table if not exists, and you have to mention the database name, Ranabima schdb, and then the table name, student as subject. After that we have to mention what are the attributes uh, in this table. So here's the first attribute, subject id, and it's in integer format. Character length is 45, and then by default uh, it's the data in this attribute is not null. And I explained in previous video, previous questions, uh, we mentioned the foreign key at the end of the query. So let's create our next attribute before mentioning the foreign keys, which is the student table, sorry, student id. Student, and it's in integer format up to 45 characters and not null. Now we can assign our foreign keys. We can mention our foreign keys. Subject id is also a foreign key, and that subject id is foreign from the subject table. So foreign key subject id, and the reference table, the references are in the subject table. Subject id is the reference to this subject id in teacher has subject table. And again, this is the last foreign key. Foreign key student id, and the references are in student table, student id. Okay, here's the uh, final query, and we can execute this query executed without any errors. And let's see our table. show tables. Okay, here are all the tables inside our database run with CHDB. Student table, subject, student has subject table, which is the table we created, and the subject table and the teacher table, and teacher has subject table. So there are five tables inside our database right now. And let's move on to the last question. Subject, sorry, students need to add a column named id in the table named student has subject, which is created to store all the subjects they are learning. Your team leader says that the column you add must be a primary key and that column must be auto incremented. Create the required DDL query at that column to the subject student has subject table using that query. Okay, again we have to use the alter keyword to add a new attribute to this student has subject table. So alter table in Ranabima CHTB. Now we have to mention the table name student has subject and add attribute. Attribute name is id and it's in integer format, also not null, and auto incremented, and it's the primary key. Okay, here query okay. Now we can see what are the attributes inside our student has subject table. So describe Ranabima SCHDB student has subject. Okay, here these are the three attributes created inside our student has subject table: subject id, student id, and the id, and it's the primary key, not null, and data type is integer, and also the id is auto incremented. Now let's see these data graphically inside our, sorry, using our Hades SQL browser. I refresh the database, and here are the new uh, here are the two new tables we created in this video. Student has subject table, and these are the uh, attributes: subject id, student id, and the id, which is the primary key, and integer length, and it's auto incremented. And also the subject id and student id is foreign key. You can see in the foreign keys attribute subject id in this table. The reference table is Ranabima CHTB subject table. The foreign column is the subject ID and same as the student ID. And let's go to the teacher has subject table. Here subject ID, teacher ID, and also the ID. The foreign keys are subject ID, which is foreign from subject table. The foreign ID is subject ID in the subject table, and also the teacher table is the same. So I think we complete the question set 45. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you in the next video.